Well, hello, everybody. This is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to Rattlecast number 225. Thanks so much for joining me this day after Christmas, one day late. I'm so glad you could make it, even though the schedule shifted a little bit. Today's guest is Debra Marquart. She'll be joining us in about 5 minutes, but before we begin, I should say that Rattle is a publication of the Rattle Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit working to promote the practice of poetry and unaffiliated with any other organization. We just do this. We love poetry and know you do too. So please do click the like button and share. Make sure you're subscribed. Really click the like button now because there's only 6 likes and there's a lot of people watching live. So just click that and that would help a lot on YouTube. Over on Facebook, it's always slow to load these days, but if you would click the like button there and share it there as well, that really helps. After the fact, leave a review on iTunes or Spotify. Whatever you can do to help poetry spread around the internet is extremely appreciated. That's all we ask for you to do, so please do it right now if you would. Now, like I said, today's guest is Debra Marquart, but we're always starting with our Poet Respond poem. And this week's poem was a occasional poem, which will come up a little bit later too, about the holiday season, the New Year, by a master of occasional poetry, actually. Wendy Videlock has had a few New Year's era type poems in the Poets Respond series. And here she is again with "The truth is a nimble little creature." And I'll read the note at the bottom before we play the poem. Wendy says of this, and she couldn't join us today, but she wishes she could. And if you want to watch Wendy on a Rattlecast, she's been on several. I can't remember the number, but she was around maybe 100 or so. Just scroll back and you'll find Wendy at some point. But she says, "I guess I've come to believe the more wars that pile up, the more destructive things appear. The greater the imperative towards service, wisdom, and the creative impulse." So this is her sort of New Year's holiday type poem in the face of so much, death and destruction going on. Here's Wendy Videlock with "The truth is a nimble creature." Oh, wait, I forgot about that. Hang on one second. I totally forgot that Wendy included some audio of music in the beginning. Yeah, hang on a second. I totally forgot that. Yeah, so YouTube would put ads on our phone. Here we go. Hang on. We're going to go right wait a second. I made a note to remember that and then completely forgot about it. So there's that. Here is Wendy Videlock without the copyright strike doing the poem "The Truth is a Nimble Creature."
The truth is a nimble little creature. Gratitude, too. The only flippin' truth is everything moves, says the moon, hovering over every mantra, every sparrow, every dollar, every Congo, every nation, every little good intention. The more difficult the world, the greater the imperative toward blame, toward distraction, toward impossible heights and humble strings of twinkle lights. My love, let us vow that through the winter we shall pause by the river, where below the frozen surface surely tiny fish are feeding. Let us make a practice of coming to bear the weather, of gathering by the fire, of reading to one another, as the sparrow wears her feather, as the moon resolves to move, as the body knows surrender, as the leaves believe September, as rhyme succumbs to reason, as the pause to remember descends upon the season.
Yeah, beautiful poem there by Wendy Videlock, and hopefully we won't get a copyright thing because of the Santa Claus is Coming to Town playing in the background, which I wasn't sure if she'd be able to appear, so I kind of forgot about the fact that was in the audio clip that she sent. But it is, if you want to go watch on the website, it is really neat to have that song playing in the background of that poem. And that was Wendy Videlock with "The Truth is a Little Nimble Creature." A beautiful poem like Wendy always shares with us. So thanks for sharing that, Wendy. And now we're going to go take a quick break and go to our main guest, Debra Marquart. So sit tight and I'll be right back with more poetry. And we're back. As I said, this week's guest is Debra Marquart. She's a distinguished professor of liberal arts and sciences and teaches in the MFA program in the creative writing and environment at Iowa State University, as well as the Stonecoast Low-Residency MFA program at the University of Southern Maine. Marquart serves as Iowa's Poet Laureate and the Senior Editor of Flyway, a wonderful journal of writing and environment. The author of 7 books, including The Horizontal World, Growing Up Wild in the Middle of Nowhere, and Small Buried Things. Marquart's been featured on NPR, BBC, all over the place. Her newest book is New and Collected, and it is right here, Gratitude with Dogs Under Stairs. And here she is, Debra Marquart. Hi, Debra. How you doing?
I'm great, Timothy. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. I love just the fact that I get books in the mail sent to me, like randomly. And,
Yes.
I hadn't actually seen a book of yours until this appeared. And it's a beautiful book, and a new one collected is always a fun one to have. So I'm really glad to see you doing so much since that 2007 poem we published that was a finalist for the Rattle Poetry Prize, Buoy, which we'll read later. And I love that poem. But it's great
Yeah.
to look at your new book. Congratulations on it.
Thanks so much. Well, that's how you get on the list. You publish a poem and then you get on the list of people who get complimentary copies. And you also chose Bowie for one of those reprint honors where you sort of reprinted it one day. And
Mhm.
that was really nice of you. I mean, it's just amazing to not only get a poem in Rattle, but then to get it re-upped, you know.
Yeah, I always love getting to pull those poems out of the archive because you can flip through and sort of see what you remember, like 15 years later, what poems stand
Mhm.
out still that you can just recognize from the title, and that was a beautiful one. So it was really fun. It was a great book to read. Gratitude with Dog Under Stars. Do you want to start out with the opening poem from the book, Chokecherry?
Yeah, well, so, one of the things about doing a new and collected is how do you do the new poems? What are the new poems? So there's about 21 kind of new poems that start the collection, and this was the one I wanted to start with because it's the most kind of like origin poem. I wanted to write a poem that goes really, really deep back, sort of under the skin of my memories. And so it's called Chokecherry. And where I grew up in North Dakota, chokecherries grow everywhere, and we used to make, jams and jellies and things. So this is a memory of those days. Chokecherry, Prunus melancarpa. Go in August with sisters down the fly-buzzed dusty rows of elms, ashes, poplars that great-grandfather planted to slow the wind. Go swinging empty ice cream buckets braceleted on wrists. All summer, this ripening, sweaty cicada hum, and chokecherry's deadly green drupes turned black cherry, then burnt umber. Now the skin is tough and tart, leaves a sandy pucker on the tongue, a catch of grit in the throat. Our maroon fingers thread branches as we heavy the harvest into buckets, the poison carried home to cure, call, siphon in colanders, steam kitchen, then thicken to jams, syrups. Pint jars stored in root cellar rows. The purple stain of summer shored up against winter's long white bleak. Remember how sometimes you'd swallow a pit? Sweet cyanide of childhood, preserved in bones.
Yeah, I love that last image too. And that poem is Chokecherry, again from Gratitude with Dog Under Stars, the new and collected book from Debra Marquart. Beautiful cover art as well, as you can see there on screen. And you mentioned already, memory is really the central aspect of this poem. It's sort of a journey through your life and your recollections in a way that is fascinating. It takes us back. What was the impetus for putting this book together, first of all, and why did you organize it the way that you did?
Well, I had 3 collections that had been published, and one of them had gone out of print. It was with Pearl Editions, and Pearl Editions went out of business, and so that book was out of print. And so I just felt it was really time to kind of bring them all under one cover. And it's just really it's a totally different experience going back to, say, 1995, the first collection was published. And I was traveling in Ireland. I was teaching a study abroad class in Ireland when I was proofing the book. and like they really love poetry in Ireland. So it was just like this really wonderful, gratifying experience to look through all of my poems from the beginning of when I first started writing and publishing poems, brand to some totally brand new ones. And about chokecherry, basically, I I always do a lot of research when I write a poem, and I discovered when I was researching chokecherries that they're totally toxic plants. The the leaves and the branches and the roots and the bark and the pits are all poisonous, and the only thing that's edible is the fruit, the actual cherry. And so I started to think about that as a metaphor of um of childhood. That's that sweet cyanide of childhood preserved in bones, that no matter how long you live or how far away from home you go, there's still this sort of deposit of memory from childhood. So, I think a lot of my poems draw from memory, and I've been working much more in the last several years on poems of imagination and speculation,
Mm-hmm.
but memory is a great warehouse for poems.
Yeah, it's interesting too in this book. Usually, when you see a new and collected or selected book, it goes forward in time. Like you start with earlier. There's like the new poems, and then we leap way back into the first book, and then you. In this one though, it goes in reverse chronological order. It moves through the most recent books, like you're sort of falling back into memory the whole way through, which is an interesting way to arrange a collection. Um, what did it feel like to look back at those old poems? Did they still feel like you, or did they feel like poems that were somebody else wrote that you sort of could connect with? I always wonder about that.
They are kind of shocking, to read because, as you publish a book, you end up reading your new poems and then end up reading your newest poems that are not even in any books you published. Um, but I think it was really fun reading the poems from my first collection, Everything's a Verb, because I wasn't really a poet. I was really a musician. I'd come across from music, and I started writing poems because I lost everything in a fire. My band lost everything in a fire, and so I started writing poems. And so my first book of poems, they're much more kind of performance texts. And, I performed them with my band and we set them to music. And so it's really, really interesting to read them now in the context of a whole body of work. And for my second book of poems, because a lot of people, when my first book came out, said, oh, she's not really a for the page poet, she's more of a performance poet. So then I really tried to write a much more kind of staid, for the page with very really regular line lengths, and just really sort of looked at stanza structures. Whereas my first book, I wrote a much more wild stanza, sort of ragged lines. And so there's a big departure
Mm-hmm.
after my first book. So it's really fun to return to it and see kind of how much I didn't really worry too much about all that stuff and just focus on expression and language, like the power of language.
Yeah, I mean that's what I noticed that it became freer, sort of as it went back in time. And did you miss that sense of like whatever, I don't care, like that attitude
Yes.
in the early days? What was your experience like relating to your former self?
Yeah, I did. I did. I mean, I do miss it. I do, I still have dreams about quitting everything and going out and joining a heavy metal band and just like, leaving it all behind. So there is this idea of the deeper you go into your training and into academe or into the profession of writing, the more rules you learn about it and the more that you see sort of what not to do. And so there's something refreshing about this voice kind of bursting, fumbling toward utterance. And I mean, I hope that we can all hang on to that voice, the
Mm-hmm.
deeper we get into and try to unlearn the conventions. And I think that's really happening. I just chose books for my graduate and undergrad poetry classes for the spring semester, and most of those writers are really, really breaking form and breaking rules and listening to their inner voices.
Yeah, it's interesting to see because there's so much energy in that kind of more free work and more spoken word type oriented stuff, and then the trick is to sort of combine it and condense it like some kind of like fusion reactor or something, where without losing any of the energy too. And I think that's really the thing that we try to do as page poets, right? Is to get that same energy, but then to find a concise way to make it as dense as possible. Um, I think let's do the next poem because I don't want to forget about poems. And so let's do. We're gonna go. Even though I talked about earlier poems, we're gonna keep with the newer ones. And next up was when the first love, of the one you love dies. You want to do that one?
Yeah, and this one actually is very measured. I mean, it has almost a formal quality to it, and it kind of I wrote it when the childhood high school sweetheart of my partner died, and I didn't know her, but I was just as devastated as he was. And so I started thinking about what our former partners contributed to their maturation and to make them, the person they are. When the first love of the one you love dies, something in you goes silent too. Didn't she lap up all the sweetness with a hungry tongue? The hot fudge sundaes he delivered to her front porch swing, summer nights, after his first job folding men's shirts at Pomeroy's department store. The billow of her teenage bedroom curtains. What future love could compete with those deep apostrophe dimples? The two of them, so young, her fingers clasping his arm in the prom photo, his blue velvet tux, the drape of her long white formal covering the casts on her legs, both broken that junior year from shin splints running track. Their wide smiles at the absurdity, the crutches angled against the wall in the photo behind them. Hard to know what unsteadied her, caused her to cast him off, driftless and unloved into the world. But you are grateful for the course she set him on toward you, dumb luck recipient of love's sweet misfortune, a heart improved through misery. Who did what to whom? Does it matter in the end? Now death steps in to sweep the equations. I can still hear her voice, one friend said upon learning of her end. That tongue so quick and cruel, that made first marks on the one you love. That tongue so young that haunts each kiss he now delivers to your willing lips.
Yeah, another
And
beautiful poem. Yeah.
that poem is for Rosie.
Yeah, when the first love of the one you love dies. Again, new poems from Gratitude with Dog Under Stars by Debra Marquart. Um, And so it was really interesting to hear about the way you started writing poetry as a metal musician. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like, what was the impetus to start putting them on the page in this way, as opposed to just as song lyrics? What was that transition like, and what was the metal band like? I'm curious about that.
Well, I had been writing song lyrics for a long time and then, interpreting song lyrics of the songs that we were doing. And, I was in a progression of bands and mostly the last sort of three or four bands were rock and hard rock bands. And so we were doing like, progressive heavy metal and, Kansas, Boston, Rush, Styx, Led Zeppelin, those kinds of bands. And then when we lost everything in the fire, I didn't have a way to make a living anymore. I mean, we had a band, but we didn't have, and we had gigs, but we didn't have any equipment and we didn't have any way to get to the gigs. And so fire, had been the agent of the destruction, but I was sort of stranded in my efficiency apartment in North Fargo. And I just lit a candle and kind of said, okay, you got my attention. Like, what were you trying to tell me? And, I had always been interested in writing song lyrics and actually writing kind of bad poems in high school in a notebook. So it was pretty natural to start writing poems. And then I just tried to pull things over from music that I knew about music, pacing, intonation, the acoustic value of words, and kind of bring it over to poetry. And then I started taking class. I mean, I went back on the road after that, but then I was really, it was like poetry stepped in and kind of saved me. Language offered a bridge out of that just terrible state of destruction. Um, and the other thing that kind of occurred to me was, and it might sound strange to say it, but we lost $60,000 worth of equipment in a really hot 2-hour truck fire.
Mhm.
And so I started thinking, if everything could burn in that time, guitars and amplifiers and power amps and microphones and microphone stands, then that stuff seems like really solid. But then I realized that I should invest my energy in something more durable
Mhm.
that would last longer. And oddly enough, poetry and writing became that sort of durable thing because it goes on. It's kind of indestructible in a lot of ways.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point too. The fungible quality of a poem, where it's here and everywhere at
It's
the same
fungible.
time, all having the same value. It's true. So, what was it
Yeah.
like the difference between writing for song lyrics versus writing poems? I mean, there's a really interesting way that there's sort of more forgiveness in song lyrics. Like you can totally mishear lyrics. Like there's some songs
Oh yeah.
that I've loved my whole life, and then I realized like after 20 years that I misheard this what I thought was a great lyric, and it's totally different. And like who cares? And there's other songs that you don't know because there's so much more to fall back on. You don't even know what it's about, but you still have the emotion, everything, all the resonance coming through the voice and the sound and the rhythm that you can sort of play with. But a poem is so stripped down. So there's sort of both more like less freedom, but then there's more too in a weird way. So how do you compare the two?
Well, there are a lot of differences, because with a song lyric, when you're singing, you really ride the vowels. I mean, consonants are death to singing because as soon as you sing a consonant, it kind of stops. And so what you do is you hold on to vowels and you ride vowels, and you can sort of like do acrobatic moves around using vowels to sort of travel through a line. So you can make a short line last a really long time, depending on how deep your breath unit is, by just, using the vowels. And you can do that with poetry too, but there is limitation to the visual because a line is only so long on the page. But in performance, you can also make a line longer by doing the same thing using sort of vowels to travel. But I think there are a lot of commonalities, and one really big one is, when you first learn a song, whether you've written it or sort of covering it, you learn the song, you learn the melody, and you learn the chords, and you learn the words. And then there's a period of time you're sort of working off of usually some kind of a cheat sheet or like rough memory. And then there's a period where you learn it. And then that's not really the end of it at all. It's like just sort of the beginning of it. Because once you learn it, then there's this whole big area of interpretation of it where you get to sort of let go of all of what the words actually mean and just sort of live on the acoustic value of the songs in the lyrics. And I think that's true with poems too. I mean, that you can really fuss for a long time about words in a poem and make sure that the words, do what you want them to do, make sense or not make sense, but then eventually, when you read a poem, you kind of have to let go of all of that work that you did and just live with the acoustic life of the language. And that's I think when it really becomes a living thing for me, the poem or the song.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, when there's the album, like that recording is fixed in time too, and the book is the same kind of way. Even though you might interpret the poem. So if you see like performers, a lot of times they'll be doing their older songs that they love, but then they reinterpret them and reimagine them so much. I mean, like Bob Dylan singing like some
Oh,
songs 20 years apart is like two totally different songs, and so
I was just
yeah.
I was just gonna say that. Like I saw Dylan a couple of years ago and I was like, is that blown in the wind? Really? Like yeah, but you can imagine how many times he's had to play some of those songs, so you wanna, you know, change them.
Do you get that impulse to mix it up? I'm reminded of having Robert Pinsky on, I think, a year or two ago. and he would sort of he memorizes all the poems and then kind of riffs, and the order of the stanzas isn't the same as what it was in the book whatsoever, and it's just sort of like jazz for him too. Do you get that sense of like wanting to riff on the poems and doing them a little bit differently in performances?
I do. I do that a lot. And like when I go into the schools, actually, sometimes I just leave certain things out because I don't want to get into trouble with the teachers. So I have sort of the clean versions of poems and the not so clean
Oh,
versions,
that's funny, like just like Spotify, or whatever, the Kids Bop.
or sometimes I'll drop lines out of poems if I'm reading them live, as opposed to when I know I have a more patient reader, for the page, or I might add an article or, like something that helps nail the line down a little bit better. Yeah, and actually when I did the proofing of the galleys of this new and collected, I was able to go in and put some new variations in the poems. I didn't do like revisions at all because that's just ridiculous. You should be looking forward and writing new poems, but I did go in and adjust some poems that I had really for years been reading differently than they appeared in print.
Yeah.
Because, when you get them out and you start reading them, they do change.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. Well, let's hear another one. Landline is next. Another poem diving into the past.
Yeah. Well, this is a poem about an ancient piece of technology, which is these wall-mounted telephones that if you have an older house, you still have one of those metal plates on your wall in your kitchen that
Well, actually, we had Greg Kosmicki on 2 or 3 weeks ago, and he had one in the background. So everybody was loving the fact that, and wondering if it still worked too, which is funny.
yeah, I mean they were so unsightly, you can't what are you going to do? You kind of have to cover them up with the wall-mounted telephone. So this is basically what in part inspired this is called Landline. I kept the beige wall-mounted trimline telephone with its lighted touchpad and Bell South label hanging from its metal plate on my kitchen wall, long after I silenced the ringer and disposed of the answering machine, long after I stopped payment of the phone bill, long after discovering that no dial tone droned on when I picked up the receiver. I never picked up the receiver. Long after I learned that the cable carrying the landline into the building no longer ran into the building. But I kept the beige trim line plugged into its metal plate on my kitchen wall, with its curling jump rope cord, which we girls stretched thin into the bathroom, our umbilical for private calls. Because if the power went out and all the plugged-in phones failed, because the trim line was engineered to receive current straight through the jack, a fact I learned when our neighbor lady was struck by lightning while gossiping during a thunderstorm. So if the expected cataclysmic solar flare, the really big one, finally hit Earth, or the magnetic poles shift, as reported to do every 500,000 years, knocking out all cell phones and computers, not to mention ATMs, bank accounts, and cable TV, at least I could pick up the landline and dial the number, that number that still materializes on my tongue, and say, "Hello, Mother. Hello. Are you okay?"
Yeah, and that was Landline, another great poem from the new section of poems from Gratitude with with Dog Under Stars by Debra Marquart. And there have been a few questions already, Deborah, about the formatting of the poems, the decision, and it's only I think in the newest section, if I remember right, of not capitalizing the first letters of sentences. And then also Monica Dobos wants to know. It seems like you have a preference, she says, for tercets. Is there any reason
Yeah.
behind that? So those two questions about just the formatting of poems. It is interesting to think about, compressing that energy like we talked about into a certain form. Why choose to do what we do? So why those two choices?
I do seem to like tercets. I notice this, especially looking at a whole body of work. And I think there's something about tercets. It's like I usually use couplets for really kind of grave and serious and sort of lyric
Hmm.
poems. And one of the things I like about couplets is it sort of slows the reader down and it feels very sort of pure and elemental. And so then quatrains feel like a little bit elaborate, there's like so much going on. But tercets are nice because they're shorter, and I feel not to say I don't use when I write poems, I don't use a sort of what we would think of as a paragraphing logic in my stanza structure. I don't, sort of stay with one subject in a stanza and then sort of break the stanza and go to another subject. But somehow over the course of moving the lines around and breaking them and re-breaking them differently, I find I often do end up, adhering to a tercet. But the other thing, I came up with this strategy for revision that I really need to write an article about this, but it's like I call it the characteristic line length. Because I'm a free verse poet, I don't really work with, scansion, or I don't count, syllables or anything. And so, how do you get compression of language? How do you sort of incentivize yourself to make those big sacrifices that make the poem, tighter? And what I figured out was that often in a draft of a poem, I would be able to identify a kind of, germ kind of like germplasm line. Like it was just like this, line that was the central line in the poem, the line that felt like the most finished and pure. And so then what I try to do in revision is get as the rest of the lines to match that line length. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the final version of the poem will have that line length, but what it does when you try to do this is to get all the language to begin to adhere to the length of and the feeling and the sort of rhythmic structure of that characteristic line, is that it forces choices. Like usually have to get rid of words that fall off the end of lines because they're maybe part of a clause, and you don't want to break on, of or from, and so it also forces syntactic changes because sometimes you can move, if the words are hanging off the edge of the line, sometimes you can syntactically sort of take those words and move them somewhere else in adjoining lines, just kind of reorganize, sort of move them somewhere, and it'll create surprises in language that, you hadn't anticipated.
Hmm.
So it's just a strategy I've developed over the years as a free verse poet to get myself to revise and, compress and make really hard choices in language.
Yeah, that's a really interesting. I've never, almost one line as being like the lodestone of the whole poem or something and helping form
Yeah.
the structure. 225 episodes in, no one's ever mentioned that technique. It's really interesting to think of it that way, and it really makes a lot of sense. And then, other people do mention that that way of being, just having some kind of forced choice, so you don't have to, so you're willing to kill your darlings, as they say, is a really important thing to do too. It's really interesting. I should say that tercets mean 3-line stanzas, just for people who don't know that word, because there are people who don't aren't familiar with all the poetry terminology. But it's interesting that different people, view that differently. So Katie Dozier says, I like tercets to hint at beginning, middle, and end of life, that it's all a cycle. And then Joshua Williams mentions that tercets tend to create an impetus, a push forward to the next line. And for me, I think of it as the amount of white space that you're creating, and sort of there's a way that the lines sort of float if there's more white space, and they kind of like move a little faster if there's less. And that's to me more how I encounter a different line length and stuff. So it's really interesting to see the different ways people interpret that. Let's keep going. Let's keep going with the poems, and we'll do. We'll do things not to put in your mouth, which I think is, for me, it's one of the most memorable poems in the book. It's hard to not sort of choke on your own tongue while you're reading this poem, but let's hear it.
Well, this is actually kind of a found poem because I went to the State Historical Museum in Des Moines, Iowa, and I found this medical exhibition. It was an OBG, no, it was an ear, nose, and throat doctor had a practice for 3 decades in Des Moines, and it was everything on display that he had dug out of people's ear, nose, and throat passages. And so it's called, they were all on display. So it's called Things Not to Put in Your Mouth, Medical Display, Iowa State Historical Museum, Des Moines, Iowa. A penny, a quarter, a button, a paper clip, safety pins closed and open, most ingested while changing diapers. In 2 shadow boxes, Dr. James Downing displayed the objects he'd extracted from patients' food and air passages between 1929 and 1956. A wishbone, a kernel of corn over large, a pen nib, beads from a necklace with a string still attached, a nail, a screw, a cover from a bottle of Anacin, thumbtacked in rows, suspended in glassine envelopes. The objects floated in glass cases, a warning about things not to put in your mouth. A toothpick, a rhinestone earring, a wadded up ball of paper, a metal snap, a cockleburst seed, spiky as a porcupine, a long sewing needle, a sardine can turnkey, many small chicken bones, things with sharp edges, cumbersome things that get caught in the throat, things that go down hard and refuse to come up, a Daughters of the American Revolution pendant, a gold hinge from a jewelry box, a price tag marked 89 cents for item number 1025293 from the Yonkers department store. The exhibit includes the doctor's leather medical bag and his instruments of extraction, a tracheal dilator, a uvula dilator, laryngeal and esophageal forceps, along with a humorous note jotted in a hospital report. Feed her anything but nickels and pennies, the note reads, beside the very nickel extracted from the child's throat.
Yeah, so that is such a tactile poem, and we talk about advising people to use all the senses in poems often, and then that's one. It's a sense that you don't usually see a poem that strongly, so strongly putting forward. That was things not to put in your mouth. Again, by Debra Marquart from Gratitude with Dog Under Stars, and yeah, it is just such a vivid poem. I really love that one. And it's another poem too where you play a lot with the format. There's a very within those, again, it's in tercets, but then there's a lot of freedom in the way that you lay out the stanzas. There's that indentation effect, sort of stepping down each line, and then there's rather than punctuation having little gaps in the text. I'll put it back on the screen so people can see what I mean. And then you pick up punctuation again toward the end. And which is interesting too, with some commas in the very last stanza, and we didn't really talk about that lack of capitalization in the first poems too. So can you talk a little bit more about that? Because people have been asking about it. What is it? How do you make those choices within a poem? There's a certain freedom that comes from choosing to write a poem in this way and the other ways too. Is it sort of something that you're conscious of, or is it something that you just go by the feel of it?
Well, I think, there was a convention, probably in the 1900s to capitalize every first letter of every line. And that's always driven me crazy because it is a form of punctuation. It always sort of stops me.
Mm-hmm.
And so it seems like it's different between poems. So the poem sort of determines whether or not it's going to be one of those looser poems that doesn't have as much punctuation, or if it's going to be a poem that really does kind of adhere to punctuation conventions like a capital letter and end punctuation periods. And so the poem decides that part of it. But once I get into that territory where the poem is kind of saying, no, I want to be more like lowercase, and then I really try to let go of punctuation as much as possible. And, I sometimes tell my students, free yourself from the tyranny of the sentence, because the sentence really organizes the way we think, subject, verb, object, construction. And so poetry is a place where you can kind of dismantle some of those things. So I really like it when I get into one of those poems where it's just sort of swimming in language and you're letting go of punctuation. And, the ending of a line is a form of punctuation in and of itself. So you usually don't need a comma there at the end, and you don't need a capital letter at the beginning of a line necessarily. And I even have taken to, using like a kind of caesura or like a 3 or 5 space, um, you know, sort of spacing mechanism. If if I don't want to use punctuation, but I feel like the line won't make any sense if there's no period there, but I'm working inside of a poem that doesn't use punctuation, then I'll use the caesura space to kind of give the pause that the reader needs in order to make sense of what the line means. And I don't know, I was reading Ellen Bryant Voigt's book, The Art of Syntax, and you know, she just has this one book. I can't remember the title of it now. It's right here somewhere. But she just kind of lets go of punctuation entirely. And the lines are just mashed together and they make total sense, you know. So I think we probably need a lot less of that in poems than we sometimes feel we need.
Yeah, I love that phrase, the tyranny of the sentence. And it is true. I mean, all the conventions of style and grammar that we use are for clarity to come through. And so if clarity comes through other ways, then who cares? You know, that those prescriptive grammarians kind of go nowhere because everything's always evolving too. So there's all that on top of it. You mentioned something. You said the poem decides how it works, and of course, you know, poets all know what you mean because you feel that sometimes that the poet's making choices of its own. But what do you mean when you say that? Where are the poems? How would you say, you know, where the poems are coming from? What is it that makes a poem? What's that source? What is the poem?
I don't know. I mean, it's a feeling. It's like going back to the characteristic line exercise, revision exercise. A lot of times, the way a poem will start is I'll hear a line, and then that line will make its way into my notebook if I find a way to remember it long enough to write it down. And the line might just live in my notebook for a long time before it adheres itself or calls down more lines to itself. But I really do feel like the poems have their own life and their own way of being and way of wanting to be in the world. And it's just kind of my job to kind of bring them down, you know, and interpret them into the material plane so that they can feed on the breath and the body of, you know, in my case, in my own case of me, if they're my poems. But that's what we do, you know, we're constantly when we're singing or when we're reading literature, reading poems, we're we're lending our breath and our bodies to making something alive
Hmm.
for the duration of that sort of acoustic life of it. And so I do really feel that they're sort of living things, you know.
Hmm.
And that I feel lucky when one gives itself to me, you know, to bring down. I mean, and they are, you know, I mean, I draw from my own autobiographical experience, so they are mine to a certain degree, but I feel like they are given they are
Hmm.
given to me.
Is there something spiritual to that? Like, is there? I'm just always curious because I don't know. You know, you feel that feeling, and what is it? Is it some kind of collective voice? Is like epigenetics? Is it like the voice of God whispering in your ear? Do you have any sort of sense of where that comes from? And I assume it happens with songwriting and performing music too. It's like something bigger than yourself, which is really I think the reason why so many of us even write in the first place is just to feel that feeling of not being yourself and being for a moment something bigger than yourself. So how do you conceive of what that is?
I understand it much better when I think about it in terms of music because I really feel that there's this huge music of the cosmos that's out there. And what we know to be music is just some small fraction of what we can hear through our, you know, relatively small and limited bodies, right? So we hear this thing that we think of as music, but it's just a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of it. And then we bring it down so that other people can listen to it. And so I think it's the same way with language and with poems. So we're using words that make sense in our own individual sort of autobiographical context, but they are resonant ideas. Um, they're resonant ideas that are bigger than the subject matter. And that's why when I hear a poem written by somebody else, I, you know, I get a vibration off of it because it's the feeling that drives the poem more than the actual words and the literal meaning of the words.
Hmm.
And so it's more the feeling, I think, that the poems kind of ride on.
Yeah, it's interesting too in the context of artificial intelligence, rising lately, and there's some songs written by AI now. I think is it Microsoft put out a thing where you could have a whole band and make your own music and just with AI, so you can say like, sing me a death metal song about mushrooms and Ovaltine, and it will like make a song, and you can like tweak it and stuff. And but there's in a way there's no heart inside of that too. And I wonder, is it possible for there to be a heart? Like what is, you know, um, is it only humans that can channel that? Do you think?
Oh my goodness. I really don't know yet. I think the jury's out on AI and what AI is capable of doing. Um, but I think about my first book of poems I wrote in the middle of the night, because I was going to graduate school and working all day. And then I would collapse into bed at night and then wake up at 3 in the morning and go to my writing room for 2 hours. And I would just write totally blind. Just I had no idea what I was writing. I was just putting language down. And then I go back to sleep and then I go to work and I take my notebooks with me and then read it and be shocked at what I had written. And I don't think that AI can do exactly that because that's kind of a processing of experience that goes like beyond logic. That's somewhere between a completely unconscious stream, sort of stream of consciousness kind of.
Hmm.
Um, and then that doesn't even count all of you know, the the hand wringing that poets do, looking for the right word for months and, all of that.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, it's so
I don't know.
fascinating to think about. Yeah, I mean, I think that AI could write like Hallmark cards really well, probably, but not the kind of
Yeah.
poems that we write in books like Gratitude with Dogs Under Stars. Um,
I always think that every poem should have some of your blood in it. And like
mm,
I always tell my students, like when Angelina Jolie and Billy Bob Thornton were married and they carried a little necklace of each other, vials of each other's blood. Do you remember this?
mhm, yeah.
In a little necklace. And I always think every poem you send out in the world should have like a little bit of your blood in it. And I mean, I don't know what AI blood like reads like or sounds like or feels
Yeah,
like.
that's a really great way to think about it, I think. Let's hear another poem. And this is from an older book. So we're starting to move back in time like we were doing. This is Kablooey is the Sound You'll Hear.
Oh yeah, well this is a childhood memory about the time that my sister Judy blew out the ceiling of my brother's bedroom with a shotgun. This doesn't ruin the poem to tell you that. It's called Kablooey is the sound you'll hear. Kablooey is the sound you'll hear, then plaster falling, and the billow of gypsum. After your sister blows a hole in the ceiling of your brother's bedroom with the shotgun he left loaded and still resting on his dresser. It's Saturday, and the men are in the fields. You and your sister are cleaning house with your mother. Maybe your sister hates cleaning that much, or maybe she's just that thorough. But somehow she has lifted the gun to dust it or dust under it. You are busy mopping the stairs. And from the top landing where you stand, you turn toward the sound to see your sister cradling the smoking shotgun in her surprised arms, like a beauty queen clutching a bouquet of long-stemmed roses after being pronounced the official winner. Then the smell of burnt gunpowder reaches you, dirty orange and sulphurous, like spent fireworks. And through the veil of smoke, you see a hole smoldering above her head, a halo of perforations in the ceiling, the drywall blown clean through insulation to naked joists, that dark constellation where the buckshot spread. The look on your sister's face is pure shit-faced shock. You'd like to stop and photograph it for blackmail or future family stories, but now you must focus on the face of your mother, frozen there at the base of the stairs, where she has rushed from vacuuming or waxing, her frantic eyes searching your face for some clue about the extent of the catastrophe. But it's like that heavy quicksand dream where you can't move or speak. So your mother scrambles up the steps on all fours, rushes past you to the room where your sister has just now found her voice, already screaming her story. It just went off. It just went off, as if a shotgun left to rest on safety would rise and fire itself. All this will be hashed and rehashed around the supper table. But what stays with you all these years later, what you cannot forget, is that moment when your mother waited at the bottom of the steps for a word from you, one word, and all you could offer her was silence.
Yeah, but a great ending on that poem. Again, that was Kablooey is the sound you'll hear. One of the poems from Gratitude with Dogs Under Stars from Debra Marquart. And it's interesting to think about poems like this they're so rooted in memory. Did you know like that wonderful ending, which was that silence.
Yeah.
At that moment when your mother waited at the bottom of the steps for a word from you, one word, and all you could offer her was silence. First off, did you realize that was what you were writing toward when you were writing the poem? Like, did that memory, was there something about that the silence was the resonant part of it? Something you were aware of before you wrote the poem, or did you realize that in the process?
It was a family story that we told for years and years about what happened, and mostly it was a funny family story because nobody was ever hurt. I mean, nobody was hurt, obviously. So many of these stories end up tragically. But then it was in my notebook just as shotgun. I knew I wanted to write it someday, but it was only when I had that realization that you just mentioned about my mother and what she must have gone through in those seconds down there waiting at the base of the stairs to for me just to say, it's okay, but I was just like so shocked.
Mm-hmm.
I I couldn't. She could see that I was okay, but she didn't know, what was in the room that I could look and see that my sister was fine. But and when I started to think, my God, what must have gone through her mind,
Mm-hmm.
that was what made it a poem for me. It was that. I didn't even try writing it until suddenly I made that connection.
Hmm.
And then I was like, oh yeah, now it's a poem,
Yeah.
you
So then
know.
I guess you would say that you were writing toward that conclusion, right? If you had that idea. The other thing I want to ask about, just with memory in general, with poems, our memories are so fallible. I mean, there's so much that we don't recognize. Like, I mean, eyewitness testimony is like the worst evidence possible because we just imagine things and we sort of see these projections and then we photocopy and photocopy and photocopy them and they're just wrong by the time we remember. Do you worry about that at all in writing sort of memory-based poetry? That you're not getting the details right? Or do you think that there are stories that who cares about what the details were because these are the memories and the memories are what matter?
Um, Well, not for poems so much. When I worked on my memoir, I really enlisted my sisters because I had three sisters. One of my sisters died, but actually Judy, the one who blew the ceiling out with my brother's shotgun. So I'd go and I'd ask them, okay, I remember it was this way. So that's a nice thing about having siblings is they can kind of be, collaborators. Um, and I honestly haven't had anyone come and say, you wrote that all wrong or you misrepresented it. But with poems, I don't really know that it's so important that the sort of literal, matter-of-fact truth is necessary. It might be more in nonfiction an issue since nonfiction goes up against journalism, immersion journalism, and things like that. In poetry, I think it's more the feeling and the spirit of the moment. And as you say, I mean, like psychologists know this, they testify in court about eyewitness testimony is some of the most unreliable testimony out there because in the middle of emergencies, we see things totally different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's really weird too, like doing shows on the Rattlecast, like stuff's taped and I remember things a certain way and I'm like, wait a minute, did I really say that? And your recollection just isn't very accurate a lot of the time. But there's a poetic truth that's bigger and deeper than the truth of which I guess ties to the emotion and the feeling and the just the broader implications of everything rather than the details. So it's interesting to hear about that. Let's do Buoy next, which is the poem from Rattle way back in 2007, and I just love this poem, so it's great to hear it from you in person.
Thank you so much for publishing this poem, Buoy. And so you came to realize that a married man is like a drowning victim when you find him, drenched, adrift, and unhappy in the vast ocean of his marriage. And won't you always be the one to spot him, a floating speck on the horizon, flapping his arms for rescue, desperate mouth ringing an O above the rolling crests and waves. You on the high, dry deck of the cruise ship, in your crisp white shorts and espadrilles. Aren't you the beacon? Aren't you the life preserver? And when you jump into the sea salt foam, if only for a refreshing swim, don't you understand that he will seize upon you, strong, buoyant swimmer that you are, grab your shoulders, pull your head under with his weight, so dense in the water, and down among the reefs and coral, with your new copper coin eyes, you will see then how he rides upon the shoulders of his water-breathing seahorse wife and his mermaid mistresses, those water nymph former lovers, and a whole tag team pyramid of three-breasted women who tried over the years to save him. Even then, next time, when you see another one go under, does it give you pause? Does it stop you from jumping in? No, not once, not ever.
Yeah, another great ending, great extended metaphor in that poem, Buoy, again from Gratitude with Dogs Under Stars. One of the things we haven't talked about is nature. So much of your work is nature based, and Flyway Journal is a journal of the environment. You teach environmental studies. How much of that? How did that develop? How did that become a main focus of your work and interest?
I think that it just happened kind of naturally since I grew up in a rural agricultural place. And so I was just sort of, aware. A lot of the material that I was writing was about working the land and agriculture and growing things and plants. And although, I rejected that and ran away from it. And that's why I dropped out of college and joined a band and kind of went into culture and music. I often say I got hijacked by popular culture and fashion and things like that. But then eventually kind of came back to it. And I think living in Ames, Iowa, where I teach Iowa State University, I mean, like the NPR station used to broadcast the farm report, every like afternoon about 2 or 3 times a day. And you'd hear about the hog, like corn futures and the hog report. So it's sort of like everywhere around you at a place like Iowa State, which is a science and technology university. But then I just noticed that everything I wanted to write about, if I did research on it, um, usually sort of looked into the science of the plants or looked into questions of soil, or I'm writing a book about oil right now, the oil boom in my home state. And any research that you do that, deals with natural history or ecology, it just yields so much interesting language. I mean, I love the language that scientists use. They think a lot about the words that they use to name plants. And so there's just a lot of deep, sort of beautiful, there's a really rich linguistic history in the language of science. So just increasingly, whenever I get an idea for a poem, I'll just start researching the subject,
Mm-hmm.
um, before I move forward with the poem. And it just brings more, I think, more specific kind of crunchy language and unusual language into poems.
Yeah, and more memorable aspects too, because they're more interesting. What is what do you think about the purpose of, writing about the environment? Do you think of it as educational? Do you feel like it's, with so much environmental destruction going on everywhere, do you think it's a part of like a political effort? Or do you think, is it raising awareness, that kind of thing that you're interested in? Or is it something more, I don't know, more personal than that, I guess you could say?
I think there's so many reasons why being attentive to the ecology of your subject, let's just, use that just general or sort of, what Lawrence Buell calls the environmental imagination. So if you sort of look at the environmental imagination of any subject you're writing about and think about, like the deep history of if you're writing about, whether you're writing about a pencil, or you're, writing about um a pig or, writing about a plant or a tree. Like I have a poem about the magnolia that my neighbor cut down that made me so mad. And I did all this research on magnolias. And so sometimes it's a praise song. Sometimes it's just a sort of like relishing in the incredible beauty or usefulness or, something that's in the natural world. And that in and of itself is a very political act because the more that you can get people to love something, the more you can get them to pay attention to it and remember it and then potentially work to protect it if it's in trouble. And so even the most personal thing then becomes political, but then there is that whole sort of environmental poetry and eco poetry that's much more political with the intention of sort of fighting back and making statements, changing politics. So it just again, I think it's the poem itself that will tell you which way it wants to come out.
Yeah, editing a journal, it's based on that.
Yeah, uh-huh.
Flyway. How much of the selections that you make for what to publish are based on the message it's sending versus the sort of poetry itself? I talked to who was, I guess, I think it was Troy Jollymore, was talking about political poetry as being hard because you're sort of just preaching to the choir and sort of like rallying the troops, but then there's no deeper exploration than that in a lot of political poetry. Do you find that when it comes to environmental poetry too? Does it have that same, sloganeering type aspect, or do you find that it's a lot more nuanced just naturally?
I think it's much more nuanced. It's that idea of sort of telling it slant. I mean, if a piece comes at it like really, really direct and is very didactic, it's usually not successful. And even though the author might have like the very best of intentions, it's not persuasive because it's not engrossing, because it's too heavy-handed in its approach to the subject matter. And so, I think it really has to be organic. And I just more and more I'm thinking about the role that love plays in writing. And I feel that like writing a poem or I'm working on two books right now. And eventually, you sort of fall so in love with them that you wouldn't abandon them, like you wouldn't abandon them like you wouldn't abandon your own child, and so you figure out ways to get them to the page successfully. But the really direct approach, um, just stating it in a kind of a preachy manner, it usually doesn't work.
Mhm.
It just people are so used to turning that off.
Yeah, it's true. It
It's
sort of doesn't get past the filter of it. So I always think of in Dune, they have these force field kind of shields around the person's body, and then they can't use guns because it'll turn on the shield and it doesn't work. So they have to do like sort of slow motion sword fighting or something. I don't know if that was preserved in the movie. I can't remember, but in the book that was a real aspect. And you kind of have to do that. You have to kind of like sneak in through someone's armor to get a political message across, I think, and that's really the way it actually works. And so not only is it bad poetry when it's just sort of pedantic, but it's also ineffective. So it's a really good point. If anybody has any questions for Debra, there's sort of one more little segment. If you have any questions, leave them in the chat windows on Facebook, YouTube. I'll pass them along. But let's hear the penultimate poem, Debra, which was Lament. It was a section of a longer poem.
Yeah, this is part of a poem that I'm continuing to work on about the oil boom in my home state. And I started to write these poems when I would go up to the Bakken Three Forks oil boom. And so this is called Lament, and it's the last in a 5-part poem. Lament. North Dakota, I'm worried about you, the companies you keep, all these new friends. North Dakota, beyond the boom, beyond the precious resources, do you really think they care what becomes of you? North Dakota, you used to be the shy one, enchanted secret land loved by only a few. North Dakota, when I traveled away and told people I belonged to you, North Dakota, your name rolled awkwardly from their tongues, a mouthful of rocks, the name of a foreign country. North Dakota, you were the blushing wallflower, the natural beauty, nearly invisible, always on the periphery. North Dakota, the least visited state in the Union. Now everyone knows your name, North Dakota. The blogs, and all the papers are talking about you. Even 60 Minutes. I'm collecting your clippings, North Dakota. The pictures of you from space, the flares of natural gas in your northern corner, like an exploding supernova, a massive city where no city exists, a giant red blight upon the land. And those puncture wounds, North Dakota, take care of yourself. The injection sites, I've seen them on the maps, 4,000 active wells, one every 2 miles. All your indicators are up, North Dakota. 18 billion barrels, some estimates say. More oil than we have water to extract. More oil than we have atmosphere to burn. North Dakota, you could run the table right now. You could write your ticket. So how can I tell you this, North Dakota? Your politicians are co-opted, or cowards, or bought out, or honest and thwarted. They're lowering the tax rate for oil companies. They're greasing the wheels that need no greasing. They're practically giving the water away. They have opened you up and said, come in, take everything. North Dakota, dear sleeping beauty, please wake up. What will become of your sacred places? What will become of the prairie dog, the wolf, the wild horses, the eagle, the meadowlark, the fox, the elk, the pronghorn, the rare mountain lion, the roads, the air, the topsoil, your people? What will become of the water? North Dakota, who will ever be able to live with you once this is all over? I'm speaking to you now as one wildcat girl to another. Be careful, North Dakota.
Yeah, beautiful example of the way to make poetry political. That line, North Dakota, dear sleeping beauty, please wake up, is the message. But then, covered in so much rhythm and music that, the message gets to slide through and connect with people. That was Lament, another poem from Gratitude with Dogs Under Stars. So great example of that, Debra. You mentioned having 2 books that you're working on now. What are those? How are they different from what you've shared here, and what's in the books, and what's the trajectory of what you're working on now?
Well, this it's the long book length poem I'm working on right now is called Leave It in the Ground, and it's just an extension of this 5-part poem that I wrote in Small Buried Things. And I went up to the Bach, and I've gone up there about 5 different times and done like long trips and taught workshops in the Bakken and sort of collected stories and met a lot of people who are working within the industry and are living up there. And there's a lot of research involved too. There's sort of scientific reports, so it has a documentary, kind of a docu-poetic feel to it. But it's really about, the ravages of oil extraction and the fact that we just have to face the fact that we have to divest and turn away from fossil fuels. It's just, there's really no other alternative when you look at the sort of the facts of the matter. And I mean, I think that even governments are coming to this place now finally. But so that book is sort of researched, and it's a book-length poem. And then the other book I'm working on is a book about the story I was telling you earlier about being a road musician and losing everything in a fire. And it's all about music, and that it's called How Fish Learn to Sing, and it's a kind of acoustic ecology of music. So I'm thinking about music as a force, in the world, and like why is it that people um, carry music around and hold it in their bodies and, sort of steer their lives around it. And it just like lives nowhere, like how does it have so much power?
Mm.
So music has been sort of my longest standing relationship in my life. And so the book it's a memoir. It's about my own kind of catastrophic career as a rock and roll musician, but it's about listening and it's about the spectacle of performance and all of that. So,
Yeah, well, I love that title and the concept of acoustic ecology. That's really neat. Well, we're up on time. Let's close out with the last poem from the book, and this is a great poem for this time of year too. It's an ekphrastic poem from a family photograph. So a lot of people are taking these family photographs, and then maybe in 20 years they can write a poem about it too. This is back when we all got along.
well, I was a road musician for many years, and so I discovered that my family kept getting together and having family gatherings without me. And so this is one of those photographs where I saw them having a lot of fun. And I wasn't in the photograph because I was off on the road somewhere.
Yeah, and here's the photograph for everybody
Oh,
who's just listening. Yeah, I mean, you can't see it, Deborah, but I'm showing it on the screen for everybody. Everybody on the porch at a family gathering, lined up on the front stairs. Looks like a really happy, fun family too.
they're having so much fun without me. Back when we all got along, everyone's thinner, less worn in the face. The children are all on the wrong laps. Disorderly pyramid of family spreading up the front steps. The sun is bright, the lawn so green. Father grasps the wrought iron rail on the top landing, his usual amused smirk, his waistband pulled high under armpits. Mother looks so young, a sister among daughters. The smallest grandson squirms on her lap. Wish I could insert myself beside them. I was missing all those years on the road playing music. My brother-in-law, Elle, is missing too, probably visiting family in Oaks. And my second oldest sister has said something funny from behind the camera to get the kids to make faces, stuck out tongues, googly-eyed monsters. Grandma stands on the lawn beside them, her delighted smile, her hands folded over her stomach. Godhealth is with her, the man she married after Grandpa died, who is already senile or soon will be. Soon, too, 3 children for my brother and his young wife, plus the discovery that the other brother-in-law, the one posed high on the landing with father, is using more than his fine carpentry skills to renovate the kitchen, bathroom, deck, and sunroom of the woman in town with the traveling husband. But not today. Today looks perfect, except for the wrinkle of the youngest daughter's absence. I want to bless them from this distance. Debbie is like the wind they often say of me. You never know when she will blow into town.
Yeah, another beautiful ending. And you can see, I think that I want to bless them from this distance was like the lodestone or anchor line or whatever you want to call it from that poem, because it's exactly what you were talking about there. And that was back when we all got along. And I had the luxury, because I have two screens, of looking at this photograph too at the same time. And really fun to see how you describe so accurately just the expressions and people. I mean, just how ekphrastic poetry works is describing in detail what you're seeing and then letting sort of the truth, the psychological truth maybe emerge, or emotional truth emerge from that. So it's a really great poem to end on. Thanks so much for sharing that, Debra. Really been so much fun talking to you tonight and getting to explore your work in more detail. It's been great.
So thank you so much, Timothy, for doing this podcast and, for all you do to bring the news of the world into poems, every week, and just your wonderful journal, Rattle. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, definitely my pleasure. Yeah. Talk to you soon, Debra. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, bye. That was Debra Marquart. Once again, her newest book is Gratitude with Dog Under Stars. You can find all of Debra's work, including this book, at her website, which is debramarquart.com. It's spelled like it is in the book, DebraMarquart, or QUART. DebraMarquart.com. So do check out this book, a wonderful book, and a whole bunch of other ones there as well, and Flyway Journal, which is a great resource too for poetry about the environment. Now we're going to take a quick break and go to the prompt lines. And I have to pull up the prompt lines slide because I didn't do that ahead of time either. I forgot a bunch of things. It's Christmas time. Who is that? Yeah, so we got to find this week's slide, and there it is. So the prompt for this week was to write a poem that includes multiple lists. So kind of like, be like Santa a little bit. Find your list, check it twice, etc., etc. That was the prompt for this week, based on a poem by Gayton Scrow, who had multiple lists within one of his poems too. So that was the inspiration for this week. Write a poem that includes multiple lists. Of course, the prompt line is all 4 prompt poems. If you'd like to join us and share yours, I'm going to copy the Zoom link and I'll put it in the chat windows on Facebook and YouTube. Only if you'd like to share a poem, join us there. Otherwise, you can sit right where you are. But if you'd like to share a poem, email it first to promptlines@rattle.com. Promptlines, all one word, rattle.com. Email it there so I can show it on the screen. Then find the Zoom link, which I'm about to deploy, and join us on the Zoom. If you'd like to just sit back and enjoy the poems, the best thing to do is sit right where you are, either on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, and do it there. So here's the link, and I'll be right back with more poetry. And we're back. Thanks for your patience. Now, Katie Dozier is here with us, our prompt poems editor from our Texas location, which is still in minimal mode. Hey, Katie, how you doing?
I wish we were doing this from elsewhere in the house where you could see that I have actually been working very hard.
I don't doubt you are one of the hardest working people I know. It is the 4th floor, the little office at the top. And so, obviously that comes last. So that makes sense too.
It does.
And minimalism is a nice, I like minimalist poetry. So maybe we could just go with that and keep the shelves bare.
That would be like the most Scroogey bookcase too. Like, no book is good enough for my bookshelf.
That's true. Or maybe one book. There could be one mystery book that manages to make it every.
I thought about just putting your book up here, but I thought you would hate me because that would be too cheesy. So I spared everyone.
Yeah, I wouldn't want you to do that. So anyway, our prompt for this week was to write a poem that includes multiple lists. And so what did you come up with? What was how did you approach this topic?
Well, I approached it by wanting to write a Hyben because I haven't in a while. And it did have me thinking in a Christmassy mood, especially with Christmas having been just yesterday. So I kind of just attacked that. And then naturally going into it, a couple of lists appeared. It doesn't, it just come off as though it is a list poem, I'd say, but there are a couple lists within it. So I'm giving myself a passing grade.
Passing grade, like a C plus, maybe a B.
Maybe we'll see.
I'm
We'll
probably
see.
okay. Well, the poem I'm sure is an A. Let's hear it.
Okay. 'Twas the night before Hyben. If you listen closely, everything ticks and talks. Of course, the clock, with its face as unreadable as someone overstuffed with Botox. The furnace, both heels and hooves on hardwood, even my grandmother's patchwork quilt. You should still hear the clack, clack, clack of her sewing machine. My fingers gallop along patchwork squares she pieced together from old doll clothes. The chain of white thread is running away at the seam. How it sounds to me just like a choo-choo train. Ghost. On the coffee table, the poker chips clink around in their case, bidding me to bet it all once more. The heavy-set hardbacks I'll never read again clamp their shoulders shut against the breeze of my breath. Perhaps the leather of their spines knows they will outlive me. How the browning needles only know to cling to their branches. Every flame is a departure. Of Christmas past? Even that which only seems to murmur or buzz, like this beeswax candlestick, really flickers with insistence, stinging the scent of every second. Of course, this wax and wick will burn down too. All we have is hours, but cookies must be eaten, baked for just the right amount of time. My life, the crescent moon of a stolen bite, present. So the haiku is Ghost of Christmas past, present.
That's great. Love the haiku, as always, Katie. And it's interesting. I was thinking about how the braided hyben, which that is, like where the hyben is hidden in there. It's very very page centric. Like talking about that relationship between page and performance. It comes across very differently. When you get to look at it versus when you are just listening. It's an interesting aspect of that.
That's really funny you say that because I read it once out loud.
I was thinking about how
and it felt very awkward reading that haiku. I thought like this is like I read that and it was like, yes, I'm a page poet.
Yeah, it was. Well, there's that page versus stage competition they do in New York City, and page the page wins very often. So there's that.
Okay, well, that's good news. There's hope for me yet then.
Yeah, well, that was great. I love the braided hyben form. So much experimenting going on with hyben. It's a lot of fun and a great occasional poem too. Hint, hint. But we'll talk about that in a second. So, my poem for this week was also holiday themed. You'd think it was like the holidays or something because we keep doing that. This is and so I was thinking about, I don't know what to write about, and it occurred to me that there was like a series of these trees. And so that's like a list, and I could like work with that. So and I ended up writing a villanelle because I thought a villanelle could be kind of like listy in the way it feels too. And then there are actually multiple lists in here, very small ones as well. So here is my poem, a villanelle, called The First Prayer. There we go, The First Prayer. For years I tried to save our Christmas trees. I'd buy them potted, plant them in the backyard as if there were a god it might appease. Add water and some light, avoid the freeze, such simple steps. It couldn't be that hard. For years I tried to save our Christmas trees from drying out. How soft their whispered pleas, a weightless rain and brittle, shard by shard, as if there were a god they might appease. Inside, a fir, a spruce, a pine would tease me with its health, its vibrancy unmarred. For years I tried to save those Christmas trees. Come spring, you'd find me on my hands and knees, digging a figure of that old canard, as if there were a god it might appease. I tried and tried, but couldn't find the keys. Once dead, I dragged them to the boulevard. For years I tried to save our Christmas trees, as if there were a god I might appease. So that is the first prayer of Villanelle.
That's wonderful. The rhymes, I like how so casually you just bust out. Like I wasn't expecting that much, but that was great.
Well, the entire thing also written while playing Mario Kart in a tournament with my son and daughter. They're very competitive, and I came in last place. But I did come up with a Villanelle in the process. That was the first prayer. And both of these, we should mention, are occasional poems. And this week on the Poetry Space, that's what we're going to be talking about, is occasional poetry, which is poetry written for some kind of event. There's inaugural poems, there's weddings, there's funerals. We talked too with Debra about the difficulty of writing poems like that are political and have that kind of message. You have to sort of sneak in the message. And in a way, you have to sneak the poetry into an occasional poem, or else it's just going to be sort of a greeting card type thing. So it's a lot to talk about. Have you prepared at all for that?
I've been preparing my whole life.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
No, I don't know how we made it almost a year doing the Poetry Space before doing this topic, because really, if you think about it, for most people, that's when they encounter poetry, the most frequently is with these occasional poems. So I think it'll be interesting and fun to look at.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about too. And the way that somehow you have to sneak real poetry in order to move people in a way that's authentic in what we're trying to do with poetry, while also getting the point across. So it's a really difficult thing to do. I think there's some quotes by Robert Frost about how difficult his inaugural poem was back when he did that for, was it Eisenhower? I can't remember who his was for, but yeah, it's a difficult thing to do, and I think it's something we should try to do more as poets, to get poetry out into the world. So that's what we'll be talking about on the Poetry Space, and that is Thursdays over on the X platform. If you want to participate, it's sort of like a roundtable audio only. You can also find the podcast version at the Poetry Space. Just put that in any kind of podcast catcher, and you'll find it. It was JFK's inauguration, says Mike Bales, with that.
Wow,
Frost was
good
there.
Recall, Mike Bales.
Yeah,
that's
excellent.
impressive.
Yeah, I thought that at first, and I thought, wait a minute, was he old? Was he, he might have been too old for JFK, so I thought maybe Eisenhower, but no, he was right. So good job, Mike. Anyway, we will talk about all that and more this Thursday. Looking forward to that, Katie, and we'll see you at the end of the show, too, to talk about next week's prompt.
Me too. Thank you.
All right, bye. That was Katie Dozier, our prompt poems editor. And first in line, we have none other than Dick Westheimer. Hey, Dick.
Hello. I was just typing in the chat that JFK's eulogy for Frost was just one of the most stunning politician speeches I've ever heard.
Oh, that's interesting. We'll have to look that up. I
think you can find, yes, you certainly can find the text, but it really situates poetry in a place that we hope it to be, and not just occasional poems. So it's a really stunning little piece.
Yeah, well, he was such a great orator, and there's so much poetry in oration. It's kind of where the overlap is on the Venn diagram or something.
Yeah. Well, these list poems, mine got really rangy, because if you have multiple lists, you go to town. And so
yeah, it was something. I've never actually seen a poem that had multiple lists like that, like Gayton's. And so I thought it'd be interesting to see what you all could come up with as a challenge.
Well, Debra had one tonight.
Yeah, she did. I mean, that's the thing, that What Not to Put in Your Mouth was also the same exact poem, which I don't know, maybe it's I had noticed it, maybe we conjured it from the ether.
It might have been. Well, mine is in this, I don't know, I do not spend my life anguishing over being picked on as a little boy, but it seems to come up in poems a lot. So
yeah, well, I mean, if it does, that means it's something that mattered psychologically that you haven't dealt with, I think. And so now's your chance.
Well, thank you, Dr. Green.
Yeah,
and
there you go. And how does that make you feel, Dick?
I will pay you in the morning.
Okay.
Checks in the mail. So this one is I think I packed in 3 lists, and it's just like I said, it's got these long rangy lines and different sort of for me. To the poet who was picked last in gym class because she had scoliosis, I wish I was you, because then I would have an excuse for all the times I was picked last, other than I couldn't throw, couldn't catch, couldn't hit, couldn't kick, and wore orthopedic shoes with leather soles. I was the only person on the math team except for Mary Laurie, who the kids teased for having 2 first names. I teased her too, and then she called me a dick, and I quit and did maths at home, counting in all the bases and estimating the angles of roofs, graphing parabolas on green line paper, looking up the values of E and arc cosines, and went on crazy tangents about toruses and traffic patterns and orbital trajectories and the melting point of sulfur and the names of stars and strange quarks and mesons and bosons. But then I learned to run the 50-yard dash really fast and thought that all the kids would like me, which they didn't, but I loved running anyway and still do today. And I wish I could apologize to Mary Laurie and get to know her grandchildren, one of whom I'm sure writes poetry and another is an astronaut. And I feel bad for those boys who called me names because they might not know what it feels like to wander in the woods and find your way to a meadow filled with black-eyed rudbeckia and sky-blue lupine, purple cloneflower and goldenrod, and orange-winged monarchs on milkweed whose seeds float on the wind like the imagination of a child who might never have written these things had he not been picked last in gym class.
That was great, and taking one of those long poems, one sentence or maybe two or three that just keep going on relentlessly. Thanks for sharing that. Wonderful details, and I loved it.
Oh, thanks so much. Can't wait to hear the others.
Yeah, me too. That was Dick Westheimer with To the Poet Who Was Picked Last in Gym Class Because She Had Scoliosis. Let's go next to Nivedita Karthik, because given the time, let's make sure we get Nivi in where she is. Hey, Nivi.
Hey Tim, how are you doing?
Great, it's great to see you. And you don't look like you're at work maybe today. The location is slightly different.
I'm back at home in Chennai, South India, with my mom. So if I'm here, I don't have to go to work, so I just have to open my laptop for work.
Well, that sounds good. That's the way to do it. That's how I do it here too. Working from home is the way to go.
Which is why I'm a bit more relaxed today. And I actually caught the entire show instead of halfway on the metro and listening with one ear open and one ear closed. But it was fun. Debra was amazing today.
Oh, great. Well, I'm so glad you could. So what do you have to share with us today?
I have an actual list poem with 7 tiny lists in it.
Well, there you go. That's multiple for sure. Another overachieving poem from Nivi.
It's called Symphony of the Rainbow because, I wanted something not too serious because it's the holiday season and season's greetings to everybody. But being a Hindu, I don't technically celebrate Christmas, although I do put up a Christmas tree. So I didn't really know what to write about Christmas. So I just thought, why not write something fun instead? So it's called Symphony of the Rainbow. The spectrum of flavor unfolds as we journey along the rainbow on an adventure untold. Enchanting elegance. Lavenders with their fragrant and calming note guide our noses to where the plums reside, snug and sweet in their royal coat, while all around outside bloom violets, the garden's secret anecdote. Cosmic creation. Elderberries and their deep blue allure remind us of the midnight sky's cosmic contour, forming the perfect backdrop for indigoing to take us on a poetic tour. Azure awakenings. Blue oceans await us vast and deep, deeper even than blueberries safe in a muffin skeep, but lighter than the blue hydrangeas where our dreams sleep. Verdant vistas. Crisp green apples make for a tangy start as we gaze up at emerald leaves, nature's work of art, while sipping on some green tea to calm our racing heart. Citrus symphony. Bananas are a bright and cheerful sight that pair well with lemons for a burst of citrusy delight, and are more joyous than the yellow daffodils nodding their heads under the weak spring sunlight. Radiant reverie. Oranges and their sun-kissed embrace combine with autumnal pumpkins to create a festive space, while tangerines share with us a citrusy grace. Scarlet secrets. Ripe strawberries are a garden's biggest treasure, matched perhaps by ruby red apples in flavorful measure. However, nothing quite compares with red roses, love's timeless pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, very fun. Maybe I've never seen a poem like that before. Rhyming based lists is a really cool idea. Since I've never seen it, maybe you could coin it. What would you call it?
That's odd.
Yeah.
Let me think about it and get back to you. I have
Okay.
about four
Well, that's your
choices running
assignment
in
for
my
next
head right
week.
now, and I can't think of one off the top of my head.
Yeah, let's make up a name, and then we could call it the Nivy list. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us as always, Nivy. It's great to see you.
Thank you, Tim, and season's greetings to everybody.
Same to you. Take care.
Thank you.
This is Nivy
Thank you. Bye-bye.
DeKarthik with a Symphony of the Rainbow. Let's go next to Carla Schwartz.
Hi,
Hey,
everybody.
Carla. Yeah, good to see you.
Good to see you too. And this is very fresh. I wasn't exactly sure about
We
it, but
love fresh poems as much as fresh bread.
indeed, maybe even more nutritious. So this is called, and it's a Haibin too,
Interesting.
and
Okay.
it's called I've been searching the internet for you, but instead came across this letter from 40 years ago.
Oh, that's cool. I love the title. Okay.
Dated 1983. I thought of just storing it with the others, but then began to read your letter in response to one of mine, in which I must have listed each of the seemingly never-ending 800 miles I'd cycled down rivers, over mountain passes, through California redwoods, and inland. This feat, followed by a visit with Utah's dinosaur bones and 3 days of hiking at altitude above Colorado's tree lines. You mentioned none of that, but mentioned how strong I must be, and back then I was strong, but also weak. You then start a list of your own, your vacations into Quebec, L'Île aux Coudes, Montreal, eating poutine. You wrote that in a year before I moved to Montreal, but somehow I knew to advise that the Gaspé would be too far to go. We were so close then. You shared how you and Kay followed your hearts, that your father's psyche was damaged, that you aimed to connect with him more in the future, that your grandmother had died. Correlation, a best friend's brother, writing. Toward the end of the letter, you started a cross out in your French. Even hearts shared don't dare reveal the truth. But I could read through the crossouts. You are not sure of Kay's love or your love for her. And yet later, you two married, parented, and later divorced. Fortune telling, we cross out the truest lines. I find this on the internet, a second marriage, and address a father who's still living with you at 100. The last time I saw you, you were cracked open, unsure if you had MS. My old friends are dying. I'm afraid to lose you before I find you. Kohlrabi dreams of old friends, turnips instead.
Oh, wonderful hymen, Carla. And I love the haiku, especially. It's really neat to see everybody's interpretations of these. We have such good poets on the open lines, and no exception there. Thanks for sharing that.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Good night, everyone.
Take care. Yeah, I love that use of the list, too. That was really neat. Let's go next to Mike Bales. Hey, Mike.
Oh, you had some nice holiday pictures on Facebook.
Oh,
Katie
thanks.
did of you and everyone. I had the pleasure of meeting Debra Marquart about 20 years ago. There's an international poetry in Des Moines, and there are two vans of people, Quad City people, that went up to catch the international poetry.
Mm-hmm.
And she had a very political poem, which actually gave me a neat voice for a poem that's called Sweet Crude,
Oh, yeah?
which might be a poem to check out.
Mm-hmm. Well, very cool. Yeah, yeah. And I was thinking she's up by your neck of the woods there in Middle America.
Oh, yeah. Iowa State is where I started college. Then I have finished at University of Northern Iowa, but I think of Iowa State more. We're going back to flagging with this poem.
All right. Well, we love going back to the
Why
flag.
not?
Yeah.
I'm a flagger poet. My poem is the construction foreman gives a safety talk to the flaggers, which one did actually. We usually did our own safety talks, but he was a good guy and he talked to us. So here's the poem. He said the locals are sick of work on the highway. He said that the work had been going on for 3 years. He said it was their road, not ours. He said that each of us should find an escape, a place to leave. He said that life can change in an instant. He told a story about a flagger who was hit by a car and crippled. He took he took us on as if members of his crew as we gathered along the side of the road. He said there would be a matter of months before he would retire. He said that he wanted to spend more time with his wife. He said this time it would be for good. As the sun broke through the clouds, he told us to take our places. He said that for every ending there was a beginning.
Oh, I love that. There was a list of statements. Great, great, Mike. And it's one of those poems. I was thinking about how Debra Marquart's poem about this one not to put in your mouth. It's one of those weird things where the poem, even though it's just being a poem, might actually save lives. Like don't put that in your mouth. But the same thing with flagging, though. I mean, it's something that people don't think about. But it's like, I hate how terrible drivers are as I'm driving down the road. But mostly,
terrible.
It's not like me standing there on the side of the road with the potential of being hit. So really, I hope that poem makes people drive a little more safely in construction zones, for one thing.
I hope a lot of them are listening to Rattle then. Yeah, this is pretty close to the things he said. He also had a big thing about having the cone where people would stop a long ways away in case one car hit another and drove it towards us. We'd have a little reaction time to jump in the ditch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good thing. I mean, just to think that everybody out there has to think of that is something that could make people drive a little more safely. I think so. That's a really good point to share. Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Mike. It's always a pleasure hearing those stories.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, take care. That was Mike Bales with the construction foreman gives a safety talk to the flaggers. Zachary Honeycutt is up next. Hello, Zach.
Hey, how's it going, Tim?
Good.
Merry Christmas, guys.
Yeah, Merry Christmas. Great to see you.
Great to see you guys, too. So I have a bit of a surprise tonight for the list prompt poem.
All right.
Yeah, I was going to share my
nativity. Zach, I have to cut you off. The only problem is that a surprise from you is not a surprise. You've sort of built surprise into the MO. So we're expecting surprise. So if you do something exactly normal, we would be surprised at that point.
I'm glad my surprisingness is normal. I'm happy to hear that. I'm glad. Yeah. Okay. So this is my so I did a satire of the night before Christmas and I made it rhyme and I incorporated some of you lovely poets into the mix. So don't get mad at me if there's a few jokes at you all. They're all done tastefully in good humor. It is a satire.
Well, this is going to be really fun. Looking forward to it, Zachary. Thanks.
A Visit from Saint Nathan, a satire. 'Twas the night after Christmas, when through the office of Rattle magazine, all the poets were stirring, especially Tim Green. The year's final rejection letters were sent by Katie with the click of a mouse, along with a list of invitations to poetry friends to spend the holiday at their house. Katie, with pen and paper in her throbbing hand, was still awake and surviving off caffeine. And with a smile that hid her ache, she jotted down a list of the thoughts of Tim Green. Nivi's big in India, so she can't come, and Brian's too busy buying glue for the little donkey's bum. The northern poet has flown south from the coldest winter you could remember, and Carla's still basking in thoughts of the beauty of December. Biswahit's taking pictures and writing haiku. I guess what I'm saying, Katie, don't write this down. It looks like it may just be me and you. When suddenly there was a knock at the door that made such a rattle. Oh no! Katie jumped up and Tim fell down off his metaphorical saddle of woe. Tim crawled to the door. As he peeled it back open, for the ghost of a moment seemed surly. Then he saw Zach, who said, I pulled a Dick Westheimer, and showed up fashionably early. Katie beamed brightly. Tim cracked a beard-entrenched smile. No, more of a hair-girdled smirk. Zach replied to their faces, "I'm happy I made it. But I left your gifts home and I feel like a jerk." Then, the sound of a second rap. They turned their focus away from Zach's gaffe and noticed Christina, who Katie noted still did not look a day past 12 and a half. "I'm happy to be here, though I've been wrestling with the ghost of Ernest Hilbert's present. But I'm happy to be here, and the brisk night's air, just like Poe, is awfully pleasant." Then she floated somewhere dark in light of yet another knock, and in the wake of dim lighting, they brushed the sleep from their eyes to set their sights on odd writings. "Hey, George," said Tim. "Brian," exclaimed Katie. "I was looking for barnyard asses," he replied, while George laughed and wiped the snow from his glasses. "As you can see, we brought ourselves but no gifts." "Come in," they replied. "Have some hot cocoa or tea. The best gift is that we can all be together like one poetry family." Bang! Another knock. This time Krista and Pedro. Mike, Mark, don't forget Clayton Clark. Poets down the block. Tammy, Gwendolyn, and Joe. And some poets Zach's seen on the show, but doesn't know. "Ah, Tim," said Dick, with a soft and sweet sigh, "tonight we'll enjoy such a wondrous read. I brought you and Katie some gigantic broccoli I grew in my garden from this little seed." Katie's bright eyes grew huge at the small sea of dirt Dick had spilled on the floor. So Tim allocated some brooms from his personal store. Richard set down the plants he brought, but of store-bought gifts, said he, "I'm barren." As Zach and the poets swept up, he said, "That's not how I'd pictured you'd use a broom, Sharon." Katie giggled, George joked, Brian read in an Irish brogue. After each poem there was a clap. Greg read the most articulate, long-winded free-verse poem about how it feels to take a crap. There was no need for gifts. We had the spirit, when suddenly we looked up because we heard some ruckus from atop the roof and thought to ourselves aloud, "Santa, why had the big white beard remained aloof?" Crash! Through the roof he fell, and the taglabes snapped from his weight. A giant sack nearly covered him, but from the reddish beard sticking out, we deduced, "Nate!" "Merry Christmas," Nate's voice boomed as he stood up. "You don't know what I've been through. I've flown around the world, and I've brought Nivy too." Then he stooped down into his big bag, and hoisted little Nivy from the sack. He told tales of how he brought Jenny Middleton gifts in London, then how he went to an English mall to bring them back. He pulled out a long pool stick for Katie and brought Zach a cool Poe mug. He gave Brian another lawn ornament, but then Tim whispered in his ear his own lament. "But what about me, Nate? There's something I'd like, but I'm afraid you'll think I'm weird." Nate chuckled a hearty "Ho, ho, ho," and knew, then pulled out some tiny scissors from his big pocket and cut Tim a piece of his hanging beard. Then Nate held up the hairy patch and beamed at the hairy mess, and borrowing a line he tweaked from the Polar Express, shouted, "The last gift of Christmas." "Now you'll have the biggest beard of all," said Katie, kissing Tim's nape. Tim frowned and replied, "Oh, Katie, if only we hadn't ran out of tape."
That was great, Zach. I don't know what the best part was. It was going to be the Dick Westheimer jokes about arriving early and the broccoli. But then when Nate shows up with a beard, I don't know, that must take it. That is excellent. Yeah, really fun.
I have to chime in and say that was amazing, Zachary. Thank you so much for writing that. What an amazing Christmas present that was to get you to hear you read that. I was laughing so hard Thank you so much for writing that. I love how you included so many people in like the most perfect way too. So thanks for writing
Yeah,
that. Oh my gosh, I love that.
that's my Christmas gift for you all. I wrote it on the fly. I had a couple more ideas, but I ran out of time. But I was gonna do like a whole extended thing about how I wrote a sonnet about Scotch tape, which really wasn't helpful because, I didn't actually bring the tape and like, yeah, and just all different ideas. But that's what I came up with on the fly. So yeah,
Well, that was it.
yeah.
I don't know how that was on the fly. That is so impressive to me. And I really, really hope that next year you do it again, not to put any pressure on you. But it's also funny because that was an occasional poem and the occasion is right now. So
Yeah.
thanks.
Thank you guys. Yeah, I'll make a sequel. I'll make a Night After Christmas Part 2.
Oh, yay.
That's great. Well, thanks so much, Jack.
Thank
That was so
you.
much fun, and really looking forward to it. You are definitely on the spot for next year.
Yeah, thank you guys. See you guys next week. Merry
Take care.
Christmas.
Yep. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
You guys too.
Yeah, that was a Zachary Honeycutt with a visit from Saint Nathan. great holiday poem there. Let's go next to Mary Keaton.
Hi.
Hey, Mary.
Happy holidays.
Yeah, happy holidays. Great to see you. Thanks for joining.
This is a fun exercise. And I couldn't think of any lit, so I have two poems. One's very short.
Oh, great.
This one's very long. And I just kept thinking of the deadly sin, so I hope this isn't too preachy.
No, definitely not. Let's hear it.
If God had a tally sheet, we'd all be screwed. Our siblings living on the street, freezing while our maids dust our baubles. Our children starving, crying as we dine at the latest rave review. Our parents at war, estranged, as screens drip blood inside pristine homes. Our grandparents forgotten, warehoused with their unbearable care. Our animals displaced, growing as extinct as ancient oxygen beds. Our planet hardened, ailing as plastic becomes ubiquitous. Our anger displaced, striking like a stealth bomber. Everything going to hell in our pocketbooks as we yearn to be famous, unable to distinguish pride, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, wrath, sloth from each other, in each other, until the fable of the prodigal son becomes our last Hail Mary before all life is extinguished and everything becomes one colossal blank slate. Bless us, Father, for we have sinned. Say these prayers. 1, Our Father, 2, Rosemary's, 10 Hail Marys. As your penance, and you will be absolved of all your sins. And don't forget to make a generous donation on your way out.
That was great, yeah. And I think, as you might have seen from my poem, I'm not particularly religious, but I do think that that might be the problem of the times. Is that, there's some good truths in that book that we tend to forget about as we become less religious. And a good poem to share. Thanks for sharing that. And then you have another one too, that's a shorter, one word per line, Christmas list poem. Why don't you read that too?
Okay, I was just thinking of Christmas lists, and this is what came to mind. Christmas list. Fantasizing, forming, reforming, refining, memorizing, antagonizing, adding, dropping, revising, satisfying, justifying, growing, offshooting, multiplying, dividing, annoying, conflicting, trying, compromising, pacifying, ignoring, denying, dropping, discarding, forgetting, remembering, romanticizing, resurrecting, simplifying, redefining, gratifying.
Really interesting poem there too, the way that list evolves. Thanks for sharing that one, Mary.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Yep, and Merry Christmas,
Happy New
holidays.
Year.
Yeah, take care. So Mary Keating with Christmas lists, and if God had a tally sheet, we'd all be screwed, which I think is unfortunately true. All right, let's go to Susan Talley to round out the Zoom. Hey,
Hello.
Susan. Yeah, great to see you. It's been a bit.
These prompts always make me think. And so what makes a list? Do we number it? If I put numbers on every line on a poem itself, wouldn't the poem be a list?
I think so, yeah.
So in that way, I could sneak in a poem and call it a list poem. And relate a list of related things. What I wanted to do, much like the past poet, is to title it, Has Anyone Ever Done This Too? Something like that, or thought this too. And I also would relate to people because even from my perspective, I'm getting to know people, you know? So I sometimes will write a poem like that because I could. So this is just a poem that I'm trying to make it be like a list. So I'll try to read it like a list.
Okay, yeah, let's hear it. Go ahead.
Thank you. That Sunday in the park, he seemed out of place, wearing a kilt, carrying bagpipes. Not quite a tune played. I watched him blaze his own horizon, the hill he roamed, my familiar climb, at times with the music of the spheres, and at the best, the timbre of the evergreens, a composition of harmonics, at once bluesy, and then the pitch would split, like a reed chopped in half. Not unlike a siren, I heard a salute, maybe to the setting sun, or a Sunday in the park. Was he reaching back to the clan, Ireland or Scotland? When I turned back, his silhouette and salutation, a little sad, but the sky was a beautiful blue-red violet, and I turned back to savor the setting.
Oh, that was beautiful. I really love that, Sally. And you know, you could see what you were talking about, you know, a poem as a list of lines, like a list of things to notice. I think it worked really well. Also love the cat cameo.
Thank
I don't
you.
know much, but it's always fun when a cat appears. But wonderful, that Sunday in the Park. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, that was Susan Talley with that Sunday in the Park. And I believe that is going to wrap up the Zoom. Let me see if there's any poets. Yeah, we have a list poem from Ted Guevara. We have a couple list poems here. Let's see. Let's share Ted Guevara's. And of course, as Ted, as always, has a really interesting photo. And this is interesting image to go along with his poem here. This is sort of, if you're just listening, it is a sort of Cirque du Soleil trapeze act of two people in wheelchairs. So a really interesting image. And this is called Thick. At Halloween, you wear yourself, and no one guesses you. Once you stepped out, everybody would not be themselves, and they would be hyper-judging one another. Regarding would be fruitless, unlike the rueful hands of your mother or the goggles you wear. Defect were they. Still, they led to owning. Affliction was the glass on them. People smudged and cared about the streaks, or the afterthought when there was a normal party in the street. But that was yesterday, when the neurologist was kind to her and just nodding at you, unsure of what ailed you. Did you want to be yourself, or that hope-bearing kid smiling every minute? He gave your mother a list of do's and don'ts. You knew it was customary. You've made your own lists, and as sure as the magazines they would renew. First, when going into class, sit in the back near the door. Second, know the muscles you can control. Third, don't speak unless spoken to. Curious kids notice sound when they don't have to turn around. You invited the morning in and the chairs in it. When you flinch, you'd whittle out the ones who care from the ones who say, what the hell? 20 years later, people have quieter responses. Their alarms are still intact. Fourth, there is a decision to make, since no matter what you do, feedback presses on. They don't fade eventually. One sees you as coping, another as inspiration, another as drunk. You see the steps of bettering yourself as milestones. Defect is now asphalt, and the affliction is the trash not picked up that week. From the cans you see what had been thrown, what had stayed. The morning hardly brings anything strange now. Fifth, it is important to inform. You tell them you can't do that ahead of time. Don't mean to belittle yourself. You're flying at their eye level amidst narrow holes. Mask you wear thickens on your face and theirs. Great. I love that. The couple lines toward the end, especially that defect is now asphalt and the affliction is the trash not picked up that week. Some great lines there. Thank you for sharing that, Ted. That was Ted Bernal Guevara with Thick. And let's see. I think we had another one. There was some regulars here. I figured this would be the type of day where we don't have as many poets, both because I think might be the hardest prompt we've done in the entire prompt lines, and also because it's, of course, the day after Christmas, and so people are, traveling with family and whatnot. So a couple of people sent poems in, though, and so I'll share this one, too. This is Andrew Tudinik from Australia, of course, and it's Reasons to Come to School, Not in This Year's Curriculum. So let's hear this. Sounds like a list to me. The poem lists multiple skills, emotions, motivations, and relationships after that that don't seem to ever quite make it into class planning. And it's after Gaetan Scro's Reasons for Admission, not indexed in ICD-10, if you remember that from last week's episode. So interesting inspiration there. A list pulling off from some of Gaetan's list poems. Here we go. Reasons to come to school, not in this year's curriculum. Because you need to learn something new and exciting, and you yearn to see your mates. Because for sure you want to get better at guitar and write a good poem. You never had to write a song before, and you want to explore starting a band now. Because it can be such a bore at home, or thinking it might be unsafe at home, and there's not much food in the house sometimes, and they don't always want you there anyway. Because you get to see your favorite teacher, and he's so easy to talk to. You missed him when he was on leave. You thought you'd fail that class, but now you're having fun, and that teacher appreciates the thought you bring. Because it's sport after school today, and your team is so good they're the best, not like last year. You like the coach, too. Because choir is on at lunchtime. You like making music together, and a girl you like will be there. Another one you know is leaving to move overseas next week, doing it for your best friend who needs you. To help another sort out a complication, and that's important, gosh. And someone else has been asked to leave. That's serious. Doing it to show your granddad who thinks you don't ever go in for the whole week. Because there are people there who get you. Not everyone, mind, but there are a few, and the counselor can really help sometimes. It all adds up. So great advice there from Andrew Tudinik, and it does all add up. That list, reasons to come to school. And my kids love to go to school. I like going to school. So we agree. Thanks for sharing that, Andrew. And let's see. Okay, I think that's it for the list poems. I'm kind of flipping through. Okay, yeah, I think that's going to wrap it up for that. Now let's go to our Sciku for the week. And the Sciku was this. It was based on this story. I'll put it up on screen. I thought this was really interesting. This might be useful to everybody out there. Here we go. Light color is less important for the internal clock than originally thought. And so there's this whole thing about, blue light being bad for sleep. And, so they have those settings on, iPads and iPhones and computers and whatnot to get more yellow light, less blue, because supposedly that makes it difficult to fall asleep, being exposed to that blue light. That was based on a single study in mice, actually, a while ago. And it turns out when you actually study that in humans, the color makes no difference. So all those iPads and stuff where they have the night mode, just turn down the brightness. And it's because it's actually the rods that have the actual, they measure the volume of photons, not the cones that do the light that actually affect your sleep, apparently, according to the study. They had 25 people and just basically showed them, exposed them to different amounts of different colors of light before bedtime. And they realized that it was just all has nothing to do with the color of the light. It's just the brightness. And so don't worry about that. The blue, the yellow, you can see some of these pictures here. They expose them to pictures of different kinds of light. Like the top one is like the regular photo. The bottom is like what would be in a night kind of iPad. And it didn't matter. So if you want to sleep, don't worry about the blue light. Just kind of keep it dark. Another thing that helps is the temperature. There's other stuff like that that's really good. Keep it cold in there. But anyway, that is the interesting article for this week. And the Sciku based on that is here. Late night, the hue one shade more blue. Late night, the hue one shade more blue. That is your Sciku for the week. And now let's bring back Katie Dozier, our prompt poems editor. Hey, Katie.
Hi, nice Sciku.
Yeah, thanks. And that is, a good information, I think, that, like half of all science papers, it turns out not to be true. That,
That blue light doesn't, that is very funny. That's bad news for some people making blue light blocking glasses or blue light I lost track and just gave up and accepted all the colors of light.
yeah, sure. Although those blue blocking sunglasses, I think you do see clearer. I think maybe there's some basis, like there's less straininess to the feel. I kind of
Comes
like
at
the
a
feel of
price
that.
though, because you look kind of weird wearing it.
That is true. Excellent point. So the prompt for next week, do you have that with you this time?
Why, yes, I do. Some kind gentleman sent it to me earlier, so it was written out. So the prompt for next week: look at an old family photograph and find an object in the background that you hadn't noticed before. Write a poem about it.
There you go. And that is that's a combination of two poems from Debra Marquart. So she had if you turn back the clock on the YouTube video or whatever, she had the landline poem about the old telephone, which you can kind of imagine in a background, an old object. Then she also had the family photo at the end of the show. So we sort of mashed those up and I made a prompt for this week that hopefully will be a little easier, because I did think this week's prompt was pretty tough.
Well, you didn't make it look tough in the end, managing to write a great villanelle while
it took 3
admittedly
hours
losing a Mario Kart. It would have been a lot more impressive if you had
if
lost
I'd won
it.
to, yeah. Well, I could have made it up. There's no one here that witnessed, so I could have. But
That's true.
The poetic truth was that I lost.
Yeah. I hope to. I'm going to be looking through my old family photographs, hoping that there's a lodestone in it, because that was my favorite part of this episode and during the interview, talking about the idea of a lodestone. And it is like, when I look at my own poems, there's a line in there that I'm like, yes, that is that, but I never had a word for it. So I thought that was super interesting, thinking about the lodestone of,
Yeah, that's a really good way, and I never come across that either. It's a good way to think of it. There's a certain line that like wants to be that length and size, and then basing the feel of the rest around that is a really good idea to do. And I think we should mention too that the prompt poems, the deadline is of course December 31st. It's a monthly thing. This prompt, because it's due in January, will be part of the January prompt poem of the month.
Right.
So you have the previous 4 prompts to choose from. Not this one. This one will be from January. So hold your fire. Wait till January for sending in these poems.
Right.
But send the previous 4. And let me put it up on the screen.
And I'll say while you're pulling that up, just that the delay, there's a short delay at the beginning of the month where you cannot submit your poems, and that is just so that I can get caught up, look through everyone's poems, and reset. But I will continue to read the poems quickly and get to them, but having that little bit of a delay really helps me to be able to feel like I've checked everything off and that everything is organized as I like to do.
Yeah, excellent. Good point. Yeah. So we'll sort of open it up to January, a day or two after January. We kind of do the same thing with the Ekphrastic Challenge too, because those problems just come up. It gets confusing as to which poem people are writing about too. So having a clear demarcation within the submittable is really really helpful. And this is how you do it. So you go to rattle.com/prompts, and you'll see the click to submit, and then you can see the 4 prompts for this month. The 4 prompts were, the first one was write a poem about a pain from childhood and use a refrain. Remember that? That seems like a long time ago.
I know, that feels like 6 months ago.
It really does.
Whoa.
And then the next was write a poem that begins with an idiomatic expression that you take literally or incorrectly and see where it goes. The Bob Hickok style theme. Then the next one is moving through an unnatural environment and describe it as though you were writing a nature poem. So the unnatural nature poem. And then finally the multiple lists for this week. Those are the 4 that count for December. So submit yours by New Year's. So
I like hearing our prompts lined up like that. I think we did a good job.
Yeah, see, the thing is, I meant to do that every month at the end, and then I've forgotten every month until now.
Well, you're doing great. You're closing out the year on a win, so that's
job.
what's important.
Well, thank you, Katie Dozier. So that is going to wrap up the show for today and for the year, as our younger viewers like to say.
Oh, yeah. Like my daughter's obsessed with telling you every time, see you next year, Tim.
Exactly. Yeah, it is. Well, but we will see you next year. Well, if you're going to watch the critique of the week, we'll see you this year still, too. So a little caveat there. But on the Rattlecast, and if you do the Poetry Space on Thursday, too, we'll see you this year. But the Rattlecast, we'll see you next year. And next week's guest in the Rattlecast is going to be Matthew Buckley Smith. Now, Matthew Buckley Smith is a wonderful formalist poet, and his newest book, which is not out yet, it's coming out this spring actually, but he wanted to be on anyway, is the winner of the Richard Wilbur Poetry Award. So it's a formal poetry-based award. Just a wonderful formal poet. Great. I mean, I'm kind of envious of his use of form. The book's called Midlife. It's his second book. He's also the host of a podcast, so that'll be interesting too about poetry and all things interesting. That is Matthew Buckley Smith. Rattlecast 226 on the New Year. So we moved this one up a day, but it's regular Monday because really New Year's is over once it's like January 1st at 8 p.m. Eastern. So we didn't bother moving that one up. It's just January 1st, Monday. Start off your week the right way with Rattlecast number 226 and your prompt to look at an old family photograph and find an object in the background that you hadn't noticed before and write a poem about that. So that's what we're going to do next week, Monday, January 1st, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. We will see you next year. Hope you have a great night, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.